Presence transforms time into awareness. This idea may appear simple, even poetic, yet its implications run deep into the heart of human experience. To understand this, one must first reflect on the nature of time and the nature of presence. Time is the continuous thread upon which we measure our lives: minutes, hours, days. It is both a tool and a tyrant. It schedules our work, dictates our obligations, and marks the stages of our existence. Yet time by itself is neutral. It has no meaning, no quality, no wisdom. Time becomes meaningful only through how we meet it, and that meeting happens through presence. Most people move through time unconsciously. They wake, they eat, they work, they scroll, they sleep, and somewhere in that repetition, they wonder where the day has gone. Hours pass, but very little is lived, because time is not truly lived unless awareness is there to receive it. The ticking of the clock means nothing to a person whose mind is elsewhere. You can sit for an hour, but if your thoughts are scattered, if you are constantly pulled by what's next or what's missing, then that hour is hollow. You were in it, yet not truly in it. You were present in body, absent in mind. Now compare that with a moment of full presence, maybe standing under the rain, feeling every drop touch your skin. Or walking slowly through a forest, every sound of leaves and birds landing directly in your awareness. Or even the quiet breath you take in the early morning, when the world is still and your mind hasn't yet started to chase. In such moments, time doesn't disappear, it becomes vivid, alive, not because something external has changed, but because you showed up for it. That is the beginning of transformation. Presence is not passive. It is not zoning out or being relaxed in a conventional sense. It is alert, engaged, attentive. To be present is to stop fighting where you are and instead fully inhabit it. This means embracing the joy of a moment, yes, but also the discomfort. The boredom, the resistance. Many people seek transformation through escape, travel, noise, stimulation, but transformation begins when you stop running and start paying attention. This is where the relationship between time and presence begins to shift. Presence takes a minute and stretches it. Suddenly, what felt like an ordinary 60 seconds becomes full of detail, of color, of nuance. You begin to see more, hear more, feel more. Your senses sharpen because they are no longer dulled by distraction. Time slows down not because the clock ticks slower, but because your awareness has deepened. Life feels longer, fuller, not because you added hours, but because you inhabited them. It is easy to misunderstand presence as something spiritual or abstract. But it is deeply practical. When you are present, you make better decisions. You respond instead of reacting. You listen more carefully to others and to yourself. Presence creates a space between impulse and action. It gives you room to see your thoughts before they become behavior. It gives you clarity. That clarity is the foundation of self-mastery. Without presence, you are at the mercy of patterns. Habits think for you. Emotions drive you. The past drags you back. The future pulls you forward. You become a puppet to your own mind, constantly chasing, constantly fearing. But when presence is cultivated, even in small moments, you become anchored. Aware, in control not by force, but by observation. This is why disciplines like meditation, martial arts, mindful walking, or breathwork are so powerful. They are not about performing a task, they are about training the mind to stay. When your mind can stay with your breath, with your movement, with your discomfort without needing to flee, then you reclaim your time. You become the one who chooses how each minute is lived. The world outside may remain the same, but your inner world becomes orderly. This is the subtle, invisible transformation that presence brings. When you are present, even ordinary tasks become extraordinary. Washing dishes becomes a meditation. Eating becomes a ceremony. A conversation becomes sacred. This is not exaggeration. This is what happens when awareness enters the picture. You start to notice the small details, the warmth of water, the texture of food, the emotion behind someone's words. Time, when filtered through awareness, becomes textured, layered, rich. People often think they need to change their life circumstances to feel alive again, but sometimes they just need to notice their life fully, intimately, without looking away. One deep breath taken in presence is more nourishing than a dozen breaths taken in distraction. 1 minute of mindful movement brings more balance than an hour of restless motion. Presence is not about how much you do, it's about how completely you do it. There is a silent intelligence in presence. When you are truly here, not projecting, not analyzing, not escaping, there is insight. Problems that seemed unsolvable become clear. Decisions that were heavy become light. Your intuition speaks, not in words, but in clarity. This is not magic. It is what happens when the noise settles. When the surface of the water becomes still, you can finally see through to the bottom. That bottom is the awareness you always had, but forgot to listen to. To be present is to return to what is real. The breath is real, the body is real, the sensations, the heartbeat, the moment. The mind will always offer stories of regret, of worry, of identity, but presence strips away the story and returns you to direct experience. In presence, there is no past to fix, no future to fear, only now, only this, and that this is more than enough. You cannot live in the future, and you cannot return to the past, but you can miss the present, and most people do. They live with eyes open, yet miss what is right in front of them. It's not because they lack intelligence, it's because they have not trained attention. Attention is the muscle of presence. Like any muscle, it must be exercised. Gently, patiently, repeatedly. This is the work of presence, to bring the mind back again and again, until the coming back becomes a way of life. People ask, how do I become more present? The answer is simple, though not always easy. You choose it. In each moment, you notice, am I here or am I elsewhere? And then you return with kindness, with commitment. You stop waiting for presence to happen to you. You make it happen through intention. Through practice, through showing up. Presence doesn't always feel good. Sometimes it reveals pain, frustration, emptiness, but it is only through meeting those parts of ourselves that we grow. Avoidance numbs us, but presence transforms us. It brings light to the parts of ourselves we have ignored, and with that light comes healing, not dramatic, not sudden, but slow, consistent, and rooted. Presence also changes how we relate to others. When you are truly present with someone, they feel seen, heard, understood, not because you solved their problem, but because you gave them your full attention. And that attention, rare, unbroken, sincere, is one of the greatest gifts you can offer. In a world full of divided minds, a still presence becomes medicine. Time becomes sacred not because of what happens in it, but because of how fully you meet it. An hour of deep presence can bring more transformation than a month of distracted effort. This is why presence is often the starting point of every meaningful path, whether it be spiritual, creative, emotional, or physical. Without presence, you may climb many ladders only to realize they were leaning against the wrong wall. With presence, even a single step is enough, and so we return to the beginning. Presence transforms time into awareness, not by changing time itself, but by awakening the one who lives through it, you. Presence makes each moment count, not as part of a clock, but as part of a life. A real, felt, embodied life. That is the power of presence. That is how transformation begins. Discipline reveals truth through discomfort. This may sound harsh at first, almost uninviting. In a world where comfort is sold as the ultimate reward, where convenience is marketed as the path to happiness, the very idea of seeking out discomfort may appear backwards. But for those who have walked the inner path long enough, who have trained body, mind, and spirit with intention, this statement is not strange. It is the heart of growth, the essence of awakening. Discomfort is not the enemy. Discomfort is the mirror, and discipline is the act of standing still long enough to see what that mirror reflects. When a person begins any serious path, whether it be martial arts, meditation, creative mastery, spiritual exploration, or physical training, the initial motivation often springs from the desire for change. But that desire is usually entangled with fantasy, the fantasy of becoming someone different, someone stronger, someone happier. What is rarely understood at the beginning is this: change is not pleasant. Change is not smooth. True change, transformation, requires confrontation, and that confrontation happens through discomfort. Discomfort appears when the familiar begins to crumble, when the old self meets resistance. When the body shakes under pressure, the mind screams to escape, and the emotions rebel against silence. It is in that very moment when all of you wants to stop, to turn away, to return to what feels safe. That is where the truth is waiting. What kind of truth? Not facts, not knowledge from a book, but something deeper, the truth of who you are beneath your defenses. Discipline is the mechanism that keeps you in place long enough to reach that depth. Discipline is often misunderstood. People think of it as punishment or rigidity or denial, but true discipline is none of these. True discipline is commitment, a quiet, unwavering choice to stay with what is hard, because what is hard holds the doorway to what is real. When the body is in pain during training, it is telling you something, not just about your limits, but about your relationship with struggle. Do you panic? Do you judge yourself? Do you blame others? Or do you observe, breathe, and move with clarity? When you sit in stillness and the mind begins its chaos, bringing up memories, anxieties, fantasies, discomfort, it is not the mind punishing you, it is revealing itself. It is showing you where your attachments are, where your wounds hide, where your fears live, but you cannot see any of this if you flee from discomfort. If you interrupt the process the moment it begins to sting, you interrupt the revelation. This is why discipline matters, not because it makes you superior, not because it earns you a medal, but because it builds the capacity to remain with pain, to remain with uncertainty, to remain with boredom, to remain with yourself, even when you are not who you wish to be. In a world of instant gratification, discipline is radical, because discipline teaches you that the most valuable things do not come quickly. They come with repetition, they come with effort, they come when you are tired, and yet you still return. And it is precisely in those returns, in those moments of choosing effort over ease, that something begins to change in you. You begin to strip away the layers of distraction, the masks you wear for approval, the lies you tell yourself to stay comfortable. All of it begins to dissolve, not dramatically, but gradually, as the heat of practice burns away the excess. The sword does not become sharp by sitting in silk. It becomes sharp through friction, through fire, through endless passes against the stone. So too with the human being. You are not born wise, you are not born clear. You become that way through the friction of your own edges. Discipline creates that friction, and discomfort makes it visible. There is a moment in training, familiar to anyone who has pushed themselves deeply, where the mind says, "I cannot," and yet the body continues. This moment is not about strength, it is about truth. It is the meeting point between perception and reality. The mind thinks you are done, but discipline says, "Let's see." And in that testing, you discover something shocking. You are capable of more than you thought. Not because you're superhuman, but because most limits are illusions, illusions fed by habit, by comfort, by self-image, and only discomfort has the power to shatter those illusions, but only if you stay. This is why we train. This is why we sit. This is why we return to the mat, the cushion, the brush, the practice, again and again, not because we enjoy pain, but because we recognize its value, because we understand that beneath pain, there is something unmovable, something honest, something that cannot be learned from words or copied from others. It must be earned through effort, through stillness, through tears sometimes, through long silences with no reward. And yet there is a strange reward hidden in that process. The reward is not pleasure, it is integrity, alignment, a sense of coming into contact with the part of you that does not shift with the wind. That does not need applause, that does not fear failure. That part of you is truth, and it is awakened through the pressure of discipline. There is no shortcut to this. People will try to give you hacks, tips, tricks. But there is no replacement for the real work. The kind of work that hurts a little, that stretches you, that humbles you, that asks you to bow your ego and enter the unknown. And in that entering, you begin to notice something else. Discomfort is not constant. It comes in waves. It rises, peaks, and then subsides. If you stay long enough, if you breathe and observe, you begin to see that discomfort is not death. It is just sensation, just energy, just mind. This realization is liberating because it frees you from the belief that you must always run from pain, that you must always fix or numb or distract. Instead, you learn to be with pain, to understand it, to hear what it is telling you. Sometimes it tells you that something is wrong, that you are forcing, that you are ignoring a deeper signal. In that case, discipline is not about pushing harder. It is about listening more deeply, adjusting, refining, but more often, discomfort is the voice of your old self resisting growth, the voice of your comfort zone pleading to remain in power, and that voice is not a guide, it is a ghost. Discipline is how you recognize the difference, how you separate the voice of wisdom from the voice of fear, how you cultivate discernment through consistent experience of facing what is difficult and observing what emerges from it. This is the heart of all ancient paths, the Shaolin monk rising before the sun to repeat the same form thousands of times, the Zen practitioner sitting through the ache of stillness to pierce through illusion, the artist returning to the blank canvas after each failure, the healer facing their own shadow before offering light to others. All of them know the same secret. Discipline is the gateway, discomfort is the teacher, and truth is what is left when the unnecessary is stripped away. You cannot access this truth by reading alone or by inspiration alone. Inspiration fades, motivation fades. What remains is your willingness to remain, to sit with what is uncomfortable, not because you enjoy suffering, but because you respect what it reveals. Discipline gives you structure. It gives you a rhythm, and within that rhythm, discomfort becomes familiar. Not pleasant, but no longer threatening. You learn to smile in the storm, to soften inside the fire, and in that softening, the deepest truths emerge, the truth of your patterns, of your conditioning, of your attachments, the truth of your story, the one you've been telling yourself for years. Discipline brings you face to face with that story, and discomfort cracks it open so you can see what lies underneath. For some, what lies underneath is fear, for others, shame, for others still, it is a deep longing to be seen, to be free, to be loved. And until you sit with that discomfort, until you allow yourself to feel it fully, it will continue to shape your actions unconsciously. This is the real purpose of discipline, not just to master a technique, but to master yourself, not to control, but to understand, to observe your resistance without becoming it, to feel the discomfort without needing to escape it. This is not easy. It requires maturity, it requires patience, and it requires a deep respect for process over outcome. But slowly, over time, something changes. You stop fearing discomfort. You start welcoming it. Not because you enjoy pain, but because you understand that within it lies your freedom. You see discomfort not as an enemy, but as a compass, pointing to where growth is possible. The more you walk this path, the more clearly you see the connection between discipline and truth. They are not separate. One opens the door, the other steps through. One builds the container, the other fills it with meaning. And this is why, no matter your path, no matter your role in life, if you truly seek what is real, discipline must become your ally. Not through force, but through devotion, through a deep commitment to not look away, to not turn aside when things get difficult, but to remain, to breathe, to bow, and to allow the truth to rise, not from comfort, but from the honest fire of discomfort itself. Stillness uncovers the authentic self. This statement, though simple in form, is vast in depth. It speaks not to a momentary pause, not to mere quietness or inactivity, but to a deep inner condition, a state of being where the noise of the world, the clamor of thought, and the compulsion of action all come to rest. In that rest, something else arises, something not created, not manufactured, not performed. What arises is the self that has always been there, but rarely met, the authentic self. In daily life, people wear masks. Not out of deception, but survival. From a young age, you learn to be who others want you to be. You adopt roles. You mirror expectations. You absorb ideas about success, about worth, about identity. These roles become familiar. They feel safe, but in that safety, something is lost. You forget what it feels like to simply be, without comparison, without performance, without striving. Most people are constantly doing to prove, doing to fix, doing to become. Yet, beneath all that doing is a silent truth. The more you chase identity, the further you move from yourself. The authentic self does not arrive through effort. It is revealed through stillness. Stillness is not passivity. It is not withdrawal. It is not indifference. Stillness is presence without interference. It is the mind not chasing, the emotions not overflowing, the body not escaping. It is a condition of undivided attention. When you are truly still, you do not force clarity. You allow it. You do not silence the mind. You listen until the mind quiets on its own. But reaching that stillness is difficult because the modern mind is restless. It is fed constantly by devices, by entertainment, by urgency. It is addicted to motion. It finds silence uncomfortable and interprets stillness as stagnation. So when a person begins to seek stillness, resistance appears, the body twitches, the thoughts grow louder, memories surface, plans interrupt, and this is the first test, not to fight the noise, but to remain with it without adding to it. To sit in stillness is to confront all that you have avoided. In motion, you can ignore discomfort. In noise, you can hide from your inner voice. But in stillness, everything unprocessed begins to rise. Grief, shame, regret, longing, these are not signs that something is wrong. They are signs that something is being revealed. Stillness does not create these feelings. It simply creates the space where they can finally be seen. And this seeing is powerful because what you see you can understand, what you understand you can accept, and what you accept you can finally release. Most suffering is prolonged not by what happens to us, but by our refusal to be with what has happened. Stillness gives us the courage to face it, not through analysis, but through pure, direct presence. In stillness, the mind eventually begins to settle. Like mud in a glass of water, when the agitation stops, clarity emerges. You begin to see thoughts as thoughts, not as truths, but as passing weather. You notice how emotions arise, peak, and fade. You observe how tightly you've held on to identities that were never yours. You begin to sense the space between stimulus and response, and in that space, there is choice. Choice is freedom, and freedom is the ground upon which authenticity stands. Stillness also reveals what you are not. This is equally important. Many people define themselves by their achievements, their failures, their roles, their stories. But all of these are temporary, they change, and if your sense of self is tied to what changes, then your identity is always at risk. Stillness allows you to rest in what does not change. There is a quiet presence within you, an awareness that has watched every age you've been, every thought you've had, every emotion you've felt. It has never left, it has never grown older, it has never been harmed. It does not speak in words, but in knowing. It does not argue, but it is firm. It cannot be described fully, but it is deeply familiar once touched. That is the authentic self. You cannot grasp it like an object. You can only rest in it, and resting in it requires nothing but the willingness to be still, not just externally, but internally, still in ambition, still in defense, still in judgment, still in striving. This resting is not a collapse, it is an awakening. In that stillness you realize you are not your roles, you are not your fears, you are not your past, you are not your future, you are not even your thoughts. You are the awareness in which all of these appear, and that awareness, untouched, is your authenticity. When you begin to know yourself from this place, your actions change, not dramatically at first, but subtly. You begin to speak less to impress and more to connect. You choose more deliberately. You feel less urgency to prove. You stop chasing things that do not nourish you. You stop shrinking to fit into spaces you've outgrown. This is not rebellion. It is return, a return to what is true. But that return can be painful, because stillness often reveals where we've abandoned ourselves. How often have you said yes when you meant no? How often have you stayed silent when something inside was asking to speak? How often have you ignored intuition because it didn't fit someone else's map? In stillness, you see the cost of these moments, not as judgment, but as recognition, and in that recognition, there is an invitation to come back, to reclaim, to remember. Authenticity is not about being different, it is about being real, and what is real cannot be known in noise. It is felt in the quiet, it emerges when the internal commentary fades, it arises when you no longer need to defend who you are. In stillness, the self does not become, it is. Stillness also brings humility, because when all the layers fall away, when the image, the pride, the comparison dissolve, you see yourself not as special or broken, but simply as part of something vast. You recognize that you are not separate from life. You are life expressing itself uniquely in this moment. This realization softens the ego. It softens the need to be better than or more than. It replaces competition with compassion, judgment with understanding. From this place, everything becomes more intimate. The breath, the silence, the way light enters a room, the way your heart beats even when you forget to be grateful for it. Stillness makes you a student of the present moment. And the present moment, stripped of commentary, is always enough, but this intimacy requires patience. You cannot rush into stillness, you cannot force it, you must court it, you must approach it like you would a sacred fire, gently, respectfully, with reverence. At first it may feel empty, boring, agitating, but over time as you remain, the richness begins to reveal itself, and that richness is not outside you. It is you meeting yourself without distortion. You begin to notice how much of your inner dialogue is inherited. Beliefs about what you should be, how you should act, what success looks like. So many of these were given to you, not chosen. Stillness gives you the space to question, to release what no longer serves, to choose with awareness, not out of fear or conditioning. This choosing is powerful because the authentic self does not act to please. It acts to align. When you act from this place, your life becomes simpler. Not easier, but simpler. You stop scattering your energy. You stop seeking permission. You begin to live from the inside out, not the outside in. And yet, this simplicity is profound. It brings peace, not as an absence of struggle, but as a presence of inner coherence. Your actions reflect your values. Your words reflect your truth. Your relationships become more honest, even if fewer. You no longer need to perform your worth. You embody it. Stillness also changes how you listen. In noise, we hear only fragments, waiting for our turn to speak, filtering everything through our assumptions. But in stillness, listening becomes deep, spacious. You begin to hear what others really mean, not just what they say. You begin to listen to your own body, your own needs, your own quiet wisdom. This is not passive, it is responsive, because when you are rooted in stillness, your actions are not reactive, they are intentional. In stillness, time shifts, a minute stretches, a single moment can feel eternal, not because you escape life, but because you enter it more fully. You are no longer ahead or behind, you are here, and here is where the authentic self lives. Not in the future version of you, not in the person you wish others saw, but in the raw, tender, breathing reality of now. To live from this place is not to escape the world, but to move through it with clarity. You will still face challenges, you will still feel doubt, sorrow, anger, but these no longer define you. They pass through you like weather through the sky, and the sky, vast, open, unmoved, remains. That sky is your true nature, and stillness is how you return to it, not once, not as a final destination, but again and again, every day, every breath, every choice to pause instead of react, every moment you turn inward, not to fix, but to meet yourself. In that meeting, there is no need for performance, no need for apology, there is only being, pure, unfiltered, honest being, and that is where the authentic self waits, not in becoming something more, but in shedding what is false. Not in noise, but in stillness, not in striving, but in allowing, not in effort, but in presence. True change begins with self-observation. This simple truth is often overlooked, yet it stands at the core of every meaningful transformation. Before you can change anything about yourself, your habits, your behaviors, your patterns, your thinking, you must first see yourself clearly, not the version you present to the world, not the ideal you imagine in your mind, but the raw, unfiltered reality of how you move through life. And that seeing is only possible through self-observation. Self-observation is not self-judgment, it is not self-criticism, it is not an attempt to label, fix, or condemn. It is a silent awareness, a mirror held up without distortion. To observe yourself is to become the witness of your own life, to step back just enough from your reactions, from your thoughts, from your impulses, and begin to watch them unfold with curiosity and clarity. This is not easy. The mind resists this level of transparency. It wants to protect its narrative. It wants to hold onto its justifications. It prefers distraction over reflection, because reflection brings things into light that may be uncomfortable. But there is no growth without discomfort, and there is no true change without the courage to see yourself as you are, not as you wish to be. To observe yourself is to bring light to the hidden corners. How do you respond when you feel threatened? What happens in your body when someone disrespects you? Where does your attention go when you are bored, anxious, or lonely? These are not philosophical questions. They are real, lived experiences that repeat day after day, moment after moment. And most of the time, they happen unconsciously. You move through them as if they are inevitable. But when you begin to observe, you create space. In that space, something changes. Reaction becomes response. Habit becomes choice. Automatic behavior becomes conscious awareness. This is the beginning of change. Self-observation requires presence. You cannot observe what you are not present for. That is why so many people remain stuck in the same patterns, not because they are incapable of change, but because they are absent from their own experience. They live in stories about the past or fantasies about the future. They are distracted by external noise or internal narratives. In that absence, nothing new can emerge. But the moment you bring attention inward, not in a forced or obsessive way, but in a gentle, attentive way, you begin to see. You see how quickly you defend yourself when you feel misunderstood. You notice how often you say yes when you mean no. You recognize the tension in your shoulders, the shallowness of your breath, the tightness in your stomach. These observations may seem small, but they are doorways into your deeper patterns, because behavior is only the surface. Underneath every behavior is a belief, a fear, a memory, a survival mechanism. And unless you observe those underlying forces, your changes will be temporary. You might change the action, but the cause remains. Real transformation means going to the root. And to go to the root, you must see. Observation is the beginning of wisdom. It is how you learn your own inner language. It is how you recognize when you are acting from truth and when you are acting from conditioning. Most people have no idea how deeply conditioned they are. Conditioned to seek approval, conditioned to avoid conflict, conditioned to equate busyness with worth. These patterns are invisible until you start watching. When you observe, you realize something else. Much of what you thought was you is not actually you. It is a collection of influences, parents, culture, media, past experiences. It is a patchwork of internalized voices, each one pulling you in a different direction. You cannot untangle these voices by force. You can only untangle them by seeing them clearly, and when you see them without resistance, something remarkable happens. They begin to lose their grip. Awareness dissolves illusion. The moment you truly see a pattern for what it is, not as your truth, but as a reaction, you begin to create freedom. You are no longer caught in it. You are no longer owned by it. You now have the ability to choose differently, but choice is only possible through awareness. And awareness is cultivated through observation. This process is not something you do once. It is a way of living, a way of being in relationship with yourself that is honest, compassionate, and clear. It means noticing when you are disconnected, when your words do not align with your feelings, when your actions betray your values. This noticing is not meant to shame you, it is meant to wake you up. And waking up is the essence of change. Most people are sleepwalking through life, not because they are lazy, but because they are overwhelmed, overstimulated, lost in momentum. But momentum is not clarity. Doing more is not the same as being awake, and stillness is not the same as being passive. When you begin to observe yourself, you begin to slow down, not externally, but internally. You start to recognize the space between thought and action, between emotion and reaction. In that space, you meet yourself. You meet the part of you that is not rushed, not defensive, not confused. That part has always been there. It is the observer itself, silent, steady, unchanging. From this inner witness, true transformation arises, not as an effort to become someone new, but as a natural unfolding of what was always possible. The patterns that once seemed permanent begin to loosen. The stories you once clung to begin to fade, and what remains is presence, clarity, power. This power is not dominance. It is not control over others. It is the power to be responsible for your own energy, your own choices, your own inner state. It is the power to respond instead of react, to speak with integrity, to act with alignment. This is real change, not cosmetic, not performative, but foundational. And it all begins with the simple, radical act of observation. Even in the smallest moments, the power of self-observation is alive. When you feel irritation rising in traffic, when you sense a need to interrupt someone just to be heard, when you reach for your phone out of habit, not need. In these moments, you can pause, you can breathe, you can watch, and in watching, you shift. You may still feel the irritation, you may still feel the impulse, but now you are not merged with it. You are not at its mercy. You are awake within it. This is what creates space, and space is where change lives. Observation brings honesty, honesty with yourself, and this honesty is not always comfortable. You may realize that you've been blaming others for your dissatisfaction, that you've been postponing your dreams out of fear, that you've been seeking love in places that only drain you. These truths can be painful, but they are also liberating, because when you see clearly, you can choose consciously. You can stop repeating, you can start transforming, but you must be willing to look, not just when it feels good, but especially when it doesn't. Observation is not a selective practice. It is not about watching only your strengths. It is about seeing the full spectrum, your light and your shadow, your wisdom and your confusion, your confidence and your insecurity, because all of it belongs to you. All of it is material for growth. This is why observation must be paired with compassion. Without compassion, observation turns into judgment, but with compassion, observation becomes healing. You learn to hold yourself in awareness without attacking yourself. You become your own mirror, clear, steady, and kind. In this way, observation is a form of love, not sentimental love, but deep, grounded love, the kind of love that says, I see you exactly as you are, and I will not look away. This is the foundation for all healing, for all integration, for all real change. As you develop this practice, you begin to extend it outward. You start to observe others without immediate judgment. You listen more deeply. You notice the emotions beneath their words. You recognize that everyone is acting from some kind of conditioning, some kind of pain, some kind of longing. This does not mean you excuse harmful behavior, but it means you understand it. And in understanding, you create the potential for transformation, not just in yourself, but in your relationships. Observation is the root of empathy. It is the root of patience. It is the root of growth. And it must be continuous. There is no final mastery. There is no arrival point. Self-observation is a path you walk for a lifetime, not because you are broken, but because you are evolving, not because you need to fix yourself, but because you are committed to living in truth. And truth is not static, it is alive, it changes as you change. As you grow in awareness, new layers are revealed. Patterns you once thought were gone show up in subtler forms. Lessons repeat, but now you meet them with more maturity, more understanding. This is the spiral of growth, not a straight line, but a deepening cycle. Each time you return to observation, you go a little deeper, you see a little more, you understand yourself with greater nuance. And with each step, change becomes less about becoming someone else and more about becoming more yourself. Because the self you are observing is not a problem to solve, it is a mystery to unfold, a garden to tend, a flame to honor. Through self-observation, you come to know your own rhythms, your own boundaries, your own truth. You stop outsourcing your authority. You stop pretending. You stop chasing validation. Instead, you live from presence. You live from clarity. You live from the quiet power of knowing who you are, not as an idea, but as a lived, embodied experience. And that is where true change begins. In the silent gaze turned inward, in the courage to see clearly, in the willingness to stay awake, in the practice of returning again and again to the only place where transformation is possible, right here, right now, within yourself.